but there are efforts as well to try to steer the synod in a certain way towards a certain agenda. There's certainly a great leaning towards a sort of progressive vision for the church that they're trying to achieve at this synod.
I'm very grateful to have Edward Pentin on the program today. He's got a book out called The Rigging of a Vatican Synod. And I'm going to be linking to this book, obviously, in our show notes today, but you can find it on Amazon. The Rigging of a 2014 Vatican Synod, an investigation of alleged manipulation of the Extraordinary Synod on the Family. Edward Pentin, good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Good morning, Joe. Good to be with you.
I have been going through your book, and who was on the side that said they wanted to manipulate things or change things and move the discussion in a certain direction, no matter how the world's bishops or the participants felt about it?
One of the main protagonists who kind of oversaw a lot of that sort of manipulation that went on, and there was clearly a sort of preset agenda, was Cardinal Lorenzo Baldassari, who was the General Secretary of the Synod of Bishops. He oversaw quite a few efforts to change the sort of steer the synod in a certain direction, and as I say, with a sort of preset agenda. And one of those things they wanted to achieve, of course, was to allow communion for divorced and civilly remarried Catholics, and that was within certain framework. And that obviously came out in the Pope's summary document in Amoris Laetitia, which is the summary document of those two synods. But there were various different aspects of manipulation that they tried to use, which I explained in the book. And I just wanted to recall it really in terms of this synod, because you're seeing similar efforts, in many ways more subtle, but there are efforts as well to try to steer the synod in a certain way towards a certain agenda. Even though they deny there's an agenda, there's certainly a great leaning towards a sort of progressive vision for the church that they're trying to achieve at this synod.
So who was in charge of controlling what the press heard in particular? Who was the gatekeeper of information when it came to the press?
Well, as I say, the chief person was Cardinal Baldassari, but then you had other people below, like Archbishop Bruno Forte, for example. He was one of the synod secretaries, and he was responsible for writing the midterm report. And the midterm report was put out. There used to be always a midterm report at synods, and this one was used to put out the message that the church was changing its sort of approach to homosexuality. But that actual midterm report was never seen by the Synod Fathers, so it was given to the press before the Synod Fathers had seen it. So, of course, that gave a sort of a clear sort of picture of what they wanted to the press, and that sort of set the music, as it were, for the Synod, without the Synod Fathers actually passing it. It's very interesting how they're trying to do the similar sort of thing now, but doing it in a much more complex way. So it's not so easy to see. But but they are doing certain things to try to further those particular elements that they want to see promoted, such as normalization of homosexuality in the church through same-sex blessings, and bringing in women deacons. Although that's never going to happen because it's really not possible in the church's teaching in church's history for deacons to be consecrated as women deacons. Is not possible. So it's interesting, though, that they're still going to try to do that, and that the doors seems to still be open, according to the Pope at least, for them to try.
You quote Cardinal Pell a lot in chapter 1, God rest his soul. You say Cardinal Pell said the document was tendentious, skewed. It didn't represent accurately the feelings of the Synod Fathers. He said 3/4 of those who discussed it afterwards had some problems with the document. Obvious problems here that you wouldn't have to be a Thomistic scholar to come to the conclusion that something is fishy, so to speak, in Denmark.
And that's what they did. They really quite aggressively disregarded apostolic tradition and anyone who was trying to propose or promote 2,000 years of church teaching. They were disproportionately underrepresented, and so you got a much more, the more progressive side was magnified and amplified to quite considerably, and then of course that sort of set the pattern for the rest of the pontificate, because you've seen John Paul II's teaching very much sidelined, especially through the John Paul II Institute, which is basically completely gutted and completely changed through new statutes. So yes, but that was really set that's why I say the synods and the family kind of set the way, prepared the ground for what we have now.
I was also very much blown away by Cardinal Erdo and the fact that he was asked to change, the reference to Jesus Christ is the opening of the document. In all of the documents, before, during, and after, it seems rather peculiar to me that people like Cardinal Erdo would go along with that, or any of the fathers, which leads us to the revolt that happens on the synod floor, which includes not just people on the right, but people on the left as well. Tell us about that.
Yes, that's right. Yes, it did lead to a revolt led by Cardinal Pell, actually. And then, of course, it led to this letter before the second synod, from 15 cardinals who said we're concerned about the way the first synod was run. But I think the problem with the first synod was that it took a lot of people by surprise. They weren't expecting this kind of manipulation. And the thing is, under synods, under John Paul II and Benedict, were very much controlled, of course, but they were controlled with an orthodox perspective. So what they wanted was to keep to orthodoxy, whereas the family synods were very much, the starting point was basically their own subjective analysis, experience, as we're seeing today. An apostolic tradition is sort of on the back burner. And yes, exactly, that's what they told Cardinal Erdo to do. And I think it took him by surprise in the first synod, and that's why he went along with it. But it was interesting because in the second synod, he came back, he was general relator and was quite much more aggressive in terms of getting his own way in the second synod.
Bringing up Casper, though, going back to the 2014-15 synods, you were at the center of a big thing that happened with Cardinal Casper and his pushing back against African bishops who in those days were defending church teaching. They seem to be caving a little bit now. So tell me about what happened when you interviewed Cardinal Casper.
Yes, well, he came out of the synod, and I was with a few other journalists, mostly from the left, sort of progressive-leaning Catholic press, and we just got chatting, and I was interested to know whether he was concerned about the controversy of the Casper proposal regarding divorced and remarried receiving communion and so forth. And he then said, there's certain parts of the world that won't agree with it, and Africa, for example, on homosexuality, for example, it's considered a taboo there. But then he said in Africa they should not tell us too much what to do. That was his famous quote. In other words, we won't be dictated to by what the Africans say. We're going to do it our way. And that was very revealing, really, of the way they looked at the whole situation. And you're seeing it, as I say, you're seeing it just as much today as you did then. Because they're pressing ahead with this, even though most African nations will not want any kind of same-sex blessings, for example. That was his position, and it was very revealing at the time, I think.
Casper interview and the fallout, it was pretty big. I mean, it caused lots of ruffled feathers. Casper tried to deny that he said it at all. You showed him the receipts. He couldn't deny it at that point. He didn't. Then he said he didn't know he was being interviewed. Tell us about the fallout.
But he then denied it, and then I felt, well, I've got to publish the recording where he said it, and so unfortunately, it showed him to have said what he said. But yes, it was something which was regrettable, I think, certainly on his part. But then things went on during the synod where various other sort of manipulations took effect, and one of them was this book, which was written by Cardinal Burke and other scholars about the Church's teaching on communion to divorced and remarried, and that was seen to be very much sort of counter. A work that was counter to the Casper proposal, and that was sort of intercepted before we could get to the Synod Fathers. It was sent to all the Synod Fathers, and they weren't able to receive it because the Synod Secretariat delayed them receiving it. So that was another manipulation. But there were various ones, and of course they're all there in the book.
So what is your opinion in comparing and contrasting the family synod and the synod on synodality?
I think, as I said earlier, it's a little more subtle. It's not, they're not preventing books from being delivered and that kind of thing. It's more the way they're sort of working out the methodology. The methodology is crucial in these things because the way they run them tells you everything about the sort of result that they want. And of course, anyone who runs a meeting is the one who really determines the outcome of that meeting. So you're going to get, at the end of it, certainly those who want that sort of result, at least that's what they're trying to aim for, is to get that result, that sort of progressive change in the church. Not changing the church's teaching, of course, because they can't. But what they can do is change the sort of pastoral practice. Take the same-sex blessings issue, for example. If they start allowing that, then, of course, the church is going to seem to be, in the long term, in some ways favorable to homosexual acts. And that's what they want. So this is the way they try to get around not changing the church's teaching, but by changing the church's pastoral practice.
The bishop in Belgium, I reported it this morning, the bishop in Belgium seems to be rejecting the church's teaching on euthanasia because there should be some discernment, not just concrete, right or wrong. Like I said a minute ago, 2014, 2015, the African bishops seemed to stand up and defend. But now, just the other day, you asked the question to the bishop from Kinshasa, I believe it was, and he seems to give the same sort of gobbledygook answer. It seems like that has definitely changed.
Yes, I know. And what's so interesting, Joe, about this is that, in a sense, they've achieved what they wanted, which was basically to have prelates suspend the church's teaching. So you had this bishop from Kinshasa, who's actually head of the African bishops, who basically couldn't bring himself to say that same-sex blessings, same-sex acts are wrong. And he just couldn't say it because he said, we have to wait for this process of synodality to come to a conclusion. But, that's precisely what the sort of reformers, the progressives, wanted, because they don't want the church's teaching being promoted and pronounced, because that gets in the way of what they want. So that's a game plan, and it seems to be going to plan for them.
Wrap this conversation up with this. It seems like in 2014, 2015, you had enough pushback from sort of all sides of the debate. But it seems what has changed is the influence and the power of the German contingent to push these progressive ideals. Is Germany basically running the show now?
Well, this is the question, Joe, and it's a good question because they're certainly here in force in Rome for this synod, and we know that they're well financed. And one aspect that I do want to find out is precisely who is funding this synod, because it does seem to be that there's a strong German influence indeed. Yes, so that'll hopefully come out in the next few weeks.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between, and we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way, so make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.